While a digital world has democratized access to tools, technologies, and learnings, we also do need to address the growing gender-digital divide that exists. This session, Shrinking the Gender-Digital Divide, will look specifically at how different programs and initiatives have been able to harness digital technologies to build more inclusive economies and increase women's access to digital tools. We'll hear from experts in the field about how they work to meet the needs of women in agripreneurship or farming communities. Stay tuned.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our session, Shrinking the Gender-Digital Divide. My name is Alicia Luo, and I am a digital specialist with DAI Center for Digital Acceleration, calling in from Washington, D.C. In my work with CDA, I've had the great fortune of supporting the Digital Frontiers Project, which works with USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security on activities such as ICTforAg 2020. So I thank you all for your participation in today's conference and encourage you to engage with our speakers in the chat. The focus of today's panel discussion is, as the title suggests, the gender-digital divide. Women and girls, particularly those living in the Global South, already face a variety of barriers when it comes to accessing the goods, services, and economic opportunities they need to secure their stability and resilience. As many of you know, this is true in the agriculture sector, where women have limited access to land, capital, inputs, and labor. As the world moves from analog to digital systems, these dynamics can be magnified as women and girls often have less access to digital infrastructure, devices, and services. Today, initiatives around the globe are working to harness digital technologies to build more inclusive economies, and increasing women's access to digital solutions is a critical part of their work. In this session, our panelists will highlight some of the work that is being done to close the digital divide between men and women, with a particular focus on financial inclusion, and some lessons that can be applied to the agriculture sector. First, let me begin by introducing our panelists. Revi Sterling is the director of the USAID-funded WGDP Women Connect Challenge and will speak on why the digital gender divide persists and some ways to develop more targeted programming. Katie Hyatt is a technology lead at VenEquity, convened by CGAP, and will discuss how financial inclusion initiatives are helping to combat gender inequities. Revi and Katie are both joining us from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, where I'm currently located as well. Matt Strickland, who is joining us from London, is the Senior Market Engagement Manager at GSMA, and will speak about GSMA's AgriTech program and some of their findings regarding women's participation in the agriculture sector and their access to digital tools. Olivia Kelly-Loncourt is calling from Strasbourg, France, and is a policy and digital ecosystem specialist at UNCDF. She will discuss the G7 Partnership for Women's Digital Financial Inclusion in Africa and its 5 pillars. Revi, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. Gender is such an important topic, especially in agriculture, so we're thrilled to have you here, and I hope to engage with lots of you in the live Q&A. And I'm also putting my email address up because I love talking about how we close the gender-digital divide and would love to share and learn from your ideas as well. I do have a short presentation that I'm going to launch. Here it is. My presentation is just an intro on some of the issues around the gender-digital divide, and then my wonderful peers will really go into what actually works because they're the ones that have more experience on the economic empowerment side as it links to technology and agriculture for women. And so I think that together we can give you a great basic understanding from which you can build on, and hopefully we can collaborate. In the past 20 years, this digital divide between women having access to technology, less than men have access to technology, the reasons have been the same. The underlying reasons have always been cost, literacy, time, relevance, safety issues. These have been well documented by all the researchers, by people on this call, especially like with the GSMA annual reports on women, on agri-tech, on everything. The area where I really work is that intersection of social norms that keep women offline and underconnected because of people in the community that see empowered women as a threat to the status quo. And that seems like such an unbalanced equation, because in so many ways we know that women are the key to poverty alleviation in all forms. We also know that technology can be a great force multiplier, especially in agriculture, and that should be a no-brainer. It should be a really wonderful combination and of efforts if we're targeting women and digital divide and agriculture, and yet we seem to just keep missing the boat. Some of the reports I've read show that only 8% of women farmers ever even access a mobile agricultural platform or application. And knowing women's role in technology and women's role in agriculture, that they're both lessened when it comes to empowerment and agency, this is a huge problem. And if we continue to exclude women as we continue to push for digital strategies, we're going to just exacerbate the gender digital divide. I will briefly touch on why women are not using your platform or application. And I hope they are, but for the most part, I see a lot more failures than I see successes. And there are some amazing successes out there. That's not to discount from them, but it's to say for the majority of applications and platforms, the women that you're working with don't have smartphones. They don't have good enough smartphones. It breaks my heart when women go, oh, I need a smartphone to be able to access this digital app that this NGO is pushing or this bilateral is pushing. And then they go and they save and they buy the cheapest used one they can find, and it doesn't even have any of the functionality to even go online. And so again, we start pushing technology becomes a tax on the poor rather than a helpful tool. 30% of women, it's shown, lose their phones in terms of appropriation or theft in the first year of owning them. They may not know your app exists. How, are you actually channeling the right women's information networks to even get the word out about your apps? Apps are a pain. Maybe they used it at the beginning. They didn't see a benefit. So all of these things, I also hear a lot from women who say, my phone doesn't speak my language. It's a hand-me-down from Spain or from Qatar or from someplace where a family member has been working, and they bring it back and there's no connection to even the usability of it. Or the app doesn't speak my language, especially if I'm an illiterate woman. Maybe I speak a very, an oral vernacular language, which most poor agricultural women use. And here we are using phones that have apps in the standard language for the country. I also hear again and again, probably most heartbreakingly over 25 years, is women who have internalized their lower position and say, I'm too dumb to use this. I'm just too dumb. And when I do see women, and there've been a lot of reports from Harvard, from USC, elsewhere that talk about women aren't using these apps because they have their venues. They like WhatsApp. They have a Amplio talking book. They have a situation. They have a hybrid situation that they're using. They have a triangulation of information sources, and your app may not fit into that. Some things that I'm just going to briefly talk about that are probably less germane to this is our tendency as digital divide fighters is to throw out a lot of technology at people, throw a lot of training at people, a lot of generic training that, these are not women that necessarily need to learn how to use PowerPoint. They need to know that they can actually find out about some sort of blight or soil condition instead. So we've got a lot of low relevance content. And the other thing, of course, in ag is you don't have any in real life gender equity. If very few women have ever seen another woman as an agricultural extension agent, if all of the phones have a male voice or a male avatar, or even a sexless sort of interaction model, you're losing that opportunity to really tap into bringing women aboard and engaging them. And that's where we have to get into really that lack of understanding the cultural context and the need to do so. I know that's talked about all the time. It's harder to do than to say, but we can talk about that a little bit more, because there are things that really, really work. Got to find the people in power. And I see so many digital divide efforts that focus just on women, but if there are barriers in terms of employers, fathers, husbands, religious figures, mother-in-laws, any other sort of institution that says, no, this isn't for you, then right there we have an issue. So we need to find out, why do those people think the phone isn't for women? What's the root of the fear? Is it infidelity, which we hear a lot of? Is it immorality? Let's get to those issues. And there's some amazing work done trying to help power brokers understand the benefits of women in technology. None of this happens overnight. This is a long arm struggle. I mean, gender inequality has been around for a pretty long time. We've got to find those conditions under which women are able to use technology and also reap an immediate benefit from that, so they understand that this is actually an iterative and successful process. Voice and text-free user interfaces are super important. Creative cross structures where you're renting a phone to finally own it. I'd love to talk more about these. A lot of confidence work we've been doing to even help women build up the confidence that they can use these applications. So very specifically, and I'll point out a few here, we've got to look at more innovative solutions to reaching women. Where are women at? We can't ask them to come to the technology. So we've got to meet them where they're at. Organizations like Digital Green, Gramvani, others have done an amazing job with that. Have avatars and role models that look like women. And then we're going to talk a little bit about designing with the end user, and I'll of course have that with a gender lens. But I would say these are sort of the 8 things, the 8 tenets of good app development. And I will put my email address right here. I'm closing now. I'd love to talk to you about projects that I've seen work, working with the community-based and local NGOs who know this context so much better than the larger development agencies, and how to tap into this so that your agriculture digital solution is really reaching the people that will absolutely most benefit from it. And it's a pleasure to turn this over to Katie Hyatt, who really understands this issue of women's economic empowerment vis-a-vis digital technology.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to Revi for that great introduction. So I am with VenEquity, which is a community of practice housed at CGAP, which is focusing on women's financial inclusion. You are all invited to join, and I'll share some details at the end. Next slide, please. So women make up a significant proportion of agriculturalists around the world, 43%. So still less than men. Closing this gender gap would decrease global hunger by nearly 17%. Women smallholder farmers are also more financially excluded than men. They have lower levels of income, education, economic diversification, access to finance. This results in women's yields being lower than men's as well. And there are a number of reasons for this. Women have a lot more duties that they need to carry out, specifically the duty of care that often disproportionately lands on women. Increasing these yields really depends on their access to financial services. And one of the key barriers, the key constraints for women, is their lack of credit and their reliance on more informal methods of saving, of credit. They're far more likely to be denied a loan or to pay higher interest rates. And it's also worth noting that women in rural and agricultural livelihoods are far more likely to be using community-based financial mechanisms and working with microfinance organizations. In fact, 80% of microfinance institutes' clients are women, and 65% of these live in rural areas. So expanding on those services really entails confronting the prevailing social norms that influence where and how women can save their money, take a loan, generate income, and generally manage their livelihoods. So there are many gaps in the access and usage gap for rural women. I think my colleagues will probably cover that in the presentations to come as well. They're broadly known, but I want to point out that access, which we often talk about as if it's some kind of golden ticket, does not guarantee usage. And usage does not mean impact. And so a lot of the barriers to access and the barriers to usage are the same. So it can be, cost of the handset, maybe a barrier to access, and cost of a data plan, cost of just airtime, cost of charging a phone in terms of electricity can be a barrier to usage. Connectivity and is a barrier to both access and usage. I think specifically this comes into play when thinking about the individual use case. And what that means, if you're thinking about making an investment, if you're not getting coverage in your village, then the potential benefits to you are much decreased. And this really, goes in line with the perceived need. So if you're not really understanding how you're going to benefit from a mobile phone or a mobile financial services, then you're less likely to invest in the time and the money required to onboard. And I think it's worth noting that often agricultural services or financial agricultural services, such as insurance or credit, are very product driven. So they're not necessarily focused on a woman farmer in rural Zambia, but they are focused on a product that will be good for women farmers, period. And, I think we can say resolutely that a woman farmer in peri-urban Nairobi who has some small crops that she sells to supplement income is going to be very different from a woman in rural Niger, for example. However, they are both considered rural agriculturalists in sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to be very, very careful about how we think about the individual use case and the barriers to access for that woman and the barriers to usage for that woman. One area that we've been digging into recently is digital financial literacy. But before that, I want to challenge you to think about government to person payments, because we're seeing GTP payments as really being held up as a shining light to drive women's financial inclusion, bringing women on board, giving them a reason to open a bank account. And sometimes this works. We saw in Niger, a Women's World Banking reported that when they made social protection payments to women's mobile money accounts, it really decreased the time that it took them to travel to collect that money at a bank. It reduced it by 3/4. So this gives women time to pursue other productive opportunities. However, we also see it not really working as we imagined. Sort of one of the infamous figures from the 2017 Findex data talked about the dormancy in bank accounts amongst people in India. So looking at an 80% of the population having bank accounts, but over almost 50% of those bank accounts being dormant. So we need to really understand the use case. So moving on to the next slide, digital financial literacy is an area that at VenEquity we've been looking at really closely, and we've recently had a D-group dialogue, and we'll have some more information or some more discussions and a data synthesis coming out shortly. I think what we really need to notice is that digital financial tools are often designed to require knowledge and skills that rural, low-income, and time-poor women do not have. So this could be literacy, numeracy, digital proficiency. Women are far more likely to have lower quality handsets, as Revi pointed out, and they might obtain these later than their peers. So, we really need to think about from a learning perspective around these digital financial tools, how, as Revi so, rightly put, how do we make this a benefit and not a tax? And I think that we need to get a lot smarter about the way in which we teach digital financial literacy, the way in which we make these tools relevant. There's some really interesting research coming out around mental hacks, less is more approaches. Excuse me. And it's worth digging into these because we're not seeing a huge amount of evidence in the way that financial literacy and digital literacy programs are necessarily having an impact. So this really showed us what we know, and we define digital financial literacy as having really 6 core enablers: so social norms, design, access, numeracy, consumer awareness, and literacy. And I think that we are really starting to understand the role that social norms play on an individual level. Access is obviously something that our colleagues at the GSMA and others have been digging into for several years. However, areas such as numeracy, and I want to give a shout out to our colleagues at My Oral Village who are doing some excellent work around this. And One area that we want to dig into further is numeracy, and I want to give a shout out to my colleagues at My Oral Village who are doing some excellent work around this, and certainly you can find our write-up on this at VenEquity, and also intuitive design and what this actually means, and Revi certainly pointed to this. Next slide. So a few resources to help you understand DFL a little bit better. We have the IDEA.org's Women and Money research, which really digs into the lives and norms of women in 6 different countries. If you're looking to understand the dynamics around digital finance, digital agriculture in a specific community, the USAID's Gender and ICT survey toolkit is useful. USAID also worked with SAA, Strategic Impact Advisors, to look at the role of trust and women's use of digital financial services, and of course the Gates Foundation's Digitize, Direct, Design, and CGAP's Customer-Centric Guide are all useful tools to understand this gap. My time is up, but I wanted to leave you with the last slide, which really should encourage you to join VenEquity. Everyone is welcome. Feel free to drop me an email, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for that presentation, Katie. I think you brought up a really important point that we can't put all women into the same bucket, even though women might work in the agriculture sector, depending on the country that they're based in, or the region that they're based in, or the value chain. They may have very different needs and very different use cases. So thank you for highlighting that. Next, we will go to Matt Strickland. Take it away.
Hi everybody, my name's Matt Strickland from the GSMA Agri-Tech team. Pleased to be talking here today. The GSMA, for those of you who aren't aware, represents the interests of mobile operators globally, or about 750 operators, and 400 companies in the wider mobile ecosystem. The Agri-Tech program itself, we are part of the not-for-profit side of GSMA and funded through the FCDO in the UK here. So our mission, or our focus, is on driving digital services to improve the financial inclusion and climate resilience of smallholder farmers, so making commercially sustainable services that are not sort of project funding limited. So we do this through sharing knowledge, research, best practices, brokering partnerships, and through innovation funds that I'll talk about in a minute, and some of the technical assistance that we provide our partners. So just a couple of stats. We know that women make up, roughly 50% of the workforce in agriculture. Yet the gender gap still exists. It has shrunk slightly in recent years, but we know that mobile ownership is 8%, so women are 8% less likely to own a mobile phone than men, and 20% less likely to use mobile internet than men. In terms of key barriers, as what's still driving this or still creating this gender gap, we know that literacy and knowledge and skills is a big barrier. So women don't understand the potential benefits of using services. They're scared of the technology and don't know how to actually access the things they need to access or could be accessing on phones. Affordability is a big barrier. Not only the actual handset itself, but the tariffs and the services they could be accessing to access information or other benefits. And then access in terms of not only the handset, but things like formal IDs, network coverage. Actually accessing the services is a big issue. And lots of these are driven by social norms in the societies that lots of these women are living. On top of this, if women do actually overcome these initial barriers, then there's still things like the relevance of services and the information being provided, and also safety and security is concerned, not only of the device itself, but in terms of harassment or being defrauded when using these services. So what are we at the AgriTech program doing about this? We have, last year we launched an innovation fund where we are working with consortiums of agribusinesses, mobile money providers and agri-tech organizations who are proactively digitizing the last mile of agriculture. So what does this mean? Digitizing the interactions between farmers and these agribusinesses in formal value chains. And we see that by digitizing these interactions, we can start to bring together data that's traditionally in separate silos. So production and payment data is often kept at the agribusiness, mobile phone usage kept by the operators. If we can merge this information together, we can build quite powerful digital economic identities, which can be used by third-party financial service providers, so credit opportunities or insurance products that can then be targeted and delivered to agricultural users. So specific credit services or specific agri-insurance type services for these women farmers. As part of the Innovation Fund, what we're doing is our approach takes a very rigorous UX or user experience approach. So going into the field, developing solid user insights from the potential users and the target audience to understand their pain points and their interactions with these agribusinesses and the different stakeholders. But then also working with all of the stakeholders in a continuous or iterative product development process. So we will regularly look at different sources of data on how that service is using, break these down into user journeys for the different stakeholders to understand what are the good things about the service, what's working well, where are the pain points, and how can we adjust them and improve them. But by bringing all of the stakeholders together at the same time, we can use that crowdsource the different experiences and the different understanding of these interactions to come up with sensible and practicable solutions for these services. We also link our milestones and the KPIs of the projects to ensuring that women are targeted and have specific KPIs against them as well. Or sorry, onboarding women as users of these services are part of those KPIs, so that it's not just lip service given to this. The consortium and the grantees are targeted at making sure that women form a percentage of the user base that they're reaching. So we've also developed, in conjunction with our Connected Women team, a series of a checklist that we use when we're developing these services and we work through with our grantees. Just some sort of top level questions here. Things like, has the service trained and deployed women agents? Women prefer or often prefer dealing with women agents, particularly when it comes to mobile money. Is there a voice interface to overcome any technical or skills gap? Are women featured in the marketing material so that it appeals to the target audience? Is the pricing model easy to understand? Is it available in local languages or dialects? And does it work with or around existing gender norms? There's lots more that we can talk about. If you are interested, you can try and remember this link, or simply just search for GSMA AgriTech Innovation Fund, or by all means drop me a note directly. I'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt, for that really, really interesting presentation. I think it's fascinating that social norms continue to come up in these different presentations, and something that I'm very excited to discuss during the Q&A session. Last but not least, we have Olivia. Olivia, please close us out.
Thank you for the great introduction. I'm really happy to be here today. My name is Olivia Luo. I am a policy specialist at working for UNCDF, United Nations Capital Development Fund, and I'm going to present the G7 Partnership for Women's Digital Financial Inclusion in Africa. Next slide. Thank you. In 2019, during the French presidency of the Group of Seven, the G7 outlined an agenda to fight inequality. As part of this agenda, G7 leaders agreed to fund a partnership which will help achieve improved digital financial access across Africa, particularly among women. The aim of the G7 Partnership for Women's Digital is therefore to help government accelerate the use of digital financial services throughout Africa. It ambitions to support the financial inclusion of over 400 million African adults, including 60% of women. The partnership identifies 5 key pillars which constitute the critical sectors in which J7 countries can support African countries in their efforts to provide access to financial services to these 400 million people. The first pillar focuses on the need to build an interoperable digital payment infrastructure to enable the population to transact with anyone, no matter the service provider that they use. The second pillar revolves around digital identification systems. The aim here is to enable the whole population to access the official means of identification required to open financial accounts. The third pillar ambitions to improve financial regulatory frameworks to ensure the development of inclusive digital products and services. And the fourth pillar puts the emphasis on investments and policies required to maximize the social and economic returns from digital technologies and infrastructure while reducing the potential negative effects. And last but not least, the fifth pillar centers on the research required to design digital financial systems and deliver digital financial services to maximize gender equality. I'm actually going to focus on the third pillar on policies and regulation because this is the pillar that UNCDF is focusing on. UNCDF represents the regulatory pillar, so pillar number 3, and we are partnering with the French Ministry of Finance, and we focus on the 8 YMO countries in West Africa and the 6 countries of the CEMAC region in Central Africa. As the policy accelerator of UNCDF, we work with governments to ensure that their national public policy objectives empower women to participate in the financial sector. Our actions focus on 3 pillars, the first one being advocacy, the second one, acceleration of policy reforms, and the third one, capacity building. On the first pillar of advocacy, we aim to channel an African movement on women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion. In order to do so, we provide advice and build capacity so that better data, especially sex disaggregated data, as well as dialogue with market players, can help the development of gender-intentional policies and regulations. By the way, when I say women, we actually focus on all different categories of women, meaning in-school and out-of-school girls, young women, elderly women, women entrepreneurs, migrants, and obviously smallholder farmers. So we focus on the development of gender-intentional policies and regulations as part of the second pillar of our work, which is really the core of the action of the policy accelerator, which aim to accelerate policy reforms. So the policy and regulatory environment tends to be gender blind and even sometimes discriminatory. So we put the emphasis on 4 regulatory enablers for digital financial services. We believe that these regulatory enablers have a massive impact on empowering women economically, because when women have access to digital financial services, they can better control their finances, support their families, and plan for the future. One of the regulatory enablers that we focus on is about allowing the use of non-bank agents or distributors, because it enables financial services to get closer to rural population and in particular women. The third enabler aims to simplify account opening procedures based on risk, which is critical for the financial of women who do not have any official means of identification, especially women smallholder farmers. The fourth enabler that we focus on is on consumer protection, and there we provide advice on areas such as rules to ensure full transparency on fees and on fees related to account opening and transaction fees as well. And we also ensure the existence of complaint handling procedures in case of frauds or errors. These consumer protection regulations are essential so that women do not feel marginalized and do not lose trust in the digital economy. And on top of these 4 DFS regulatory enablers, we also work with governments to tackle additional regulatory or policy constraints. For instance, we also advocate for the revision of specific laws and regulations that can be discriminatory, such as laws and regulations related to land ownership and title laws, in order to enable women, smallholder farmers, to benefit from increased access to funding by using land use rights as collateral for loans. And then the last pillar of our work as the policy accelerator is on capacity building. And in a nutshell, we all know that in many fields, technology and innovation has outpaced the regulatory environment. So we ensure that regulators and policymakers can be upskilled so that they can understand the regulatory implications of the new digital economy. For instance, we partner with different educational institutions to provide access to courses on digitizing agriculture so that policymakers and regulators can have an understanding of the digital tools being deployed both directly to smallholder farmers and to others in the agricultural value chain. The aim here is really to ensure that the regulatory environment can act as an enabler rather than an inhibitor of the development of inclusive digital ecosystems. I'm going to stop the presentation here, but before I end, I would like to let you know that we will really like to partner with women associations and women representatives from women's organizations and also groups of smallholder farmers just to accelerate our efforts in terms of advocacy and to also learn from their challenges faced. So I'm going to leave my contact details at the end of the presentation here. And I'm really happy to answer any questions you may have during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Olivia. There were so many important things that you brought up, especially kind of tying back to the point made earlier by Katie. There are so many different subgroups of women that we need to focus on. When we talk about impacting women and advocating for women, we can't just keep them all in the same group. There are the elderly, there are migrants, and all of their experiences are so different. So thank you again for raising that. With that, I would love to transition into the discussion portion of our panel. And the first question is for all of the panelists, and it relates to one of the core themes for ICTforAg, which is resilience. Whereas previously resilience in the agriculture sector may have meant resilience to climate shocks or maybe economic shocks, today women in the agriculture sector are facing new threats to their resilience, such as our current pandemic. In what ways do you see digital tools, financial or otherwise, helping women navigate COVID-19 and the increasingly risky world that we're living in?
I'll jump in and just say that COVID is such an unprecedented event, and what I am actually noticing in several of the communities where women have not been able to access and use ICT as freely as men is that now the need to educate children is pushing a lot more flexibility and allowance from a community perspective for women to use technology. And I think that if that, it's sad that it takes a tragedy to do this, but I'm working with several rural communities around the world who are letting phones for education, and that's that perfect entree into, okay, well, if it's education already, how about agricultural education? How about more information? And we use that as the lead into creating opportunities.
That's fascinating. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I completely agree there. I think that the burden of care, and this is not just amongst rural agriculturalists, but we're seeing it the whole world over, has fallen disproportionately to women during the pandemic in terms of, keeping a household together, keeping kids in school. And so it really does take very intentional efforts to ensure that women are not further left behind. One initiative which has recently been launched, which is really impressive, is so Strategic Impact Advisors have done some work with USAID and the WGDP initiative that looks at digital financial literacy and teaching this through IVR, so interactive voice response. Which has been something that is launched during a pandemic, and it is a really interesting approach to reaching women who are low literacy, so perhaps and they can't travel. So yeah.
Wonderful. Olivia or Matt, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the areas we're looking into is obviously supply chains, and as Katie's just said, traveling out of area or even out of home at times have been restricted. So this access to market suddenly overnight becomes cut. So being able to I'll be careful how I use the word e-commerce, but being able to use a digital tool to access potential buyers for your crop in a local area, that with appropriate restrictions you can actually transport that produce and still sell a produce when maybe your main market has been cut off from you. Being able to identify buyers and still have that market access locally is really important. So that's certainly a key area for us that we're looking at with this fund at the moment.
Olivia, do you have anything to add to this question? If not, I'm more than happy to move on to the next one.
Yes, I can actually maybe focus on the role of mobile network operators and the use of mobile phone to actually provide information to smallholder farmers. And actually, I think that the COVID-19 has increased the efforts that these mobile network operators have done in this regard. So maybe that's also one of the positive impact of the pandemic that we have also identified.
Great, thank you so much for those responses. Katie, this next question is actually for you. While the development community is becoming more familiar with this concept of the gender digital divide, many of our attendees and speakers may still be getting up to speed on this issue. From your perspective, what are some common misconceptions about the role that digital tools can play in addressing some of the barriers that women and girls face?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's an interesting question. And, we've recently been digging into this at VenEquity, looking at myths and the assumptions that we make around women's use of digital financial services and just financial services. And I think that, we're very keen to put people into buckets. As I mentioned, the two farmers on different sides of Africa can't really be compared. And I think we need to test our assumptions. And I'm guilty of making assumptions. Everyone is guilty of making assumptions. It's sort of like a mental hack. We sort of say, okay, well, if we're dealing with women, they must be more vulnerable. If we're dealing with rural women, then they must have less access to education. These are all things that we build into our design. If we don't question our assumptions, and I think that is something that we need to be really clear about, because one myth can, or one assumption can be true for one community and false for another, as per thinking about maybe agricultural subsidies and what they, how they improve women agriculturalist lives. And making sure that if we are doing these things, that they really are gender intentional. We are looking at things through a gender lens, but not, really just testing our assumptions and being very clear about what that means.
Great, thank you so much. And on that note about assumptions, I would love to direct my next question to Revi. During your presentation, you made a very bold statement, why women are not using your digital tools. And so I want to direct a question to you about why that might be. We've heard so much about the importance of designing with users, the importance of human-centered design, but it seems like there's still a gap there that is not being filled. Is it because of these assumptions that we make about women? What are some of the things that you've been seeing?
It's a great question, and it goes really to the heart of how we do our data collection and our information gap assessment, before we create the platform and the app, which is to find out women's specific information needs, not agriculture at large information needs, not community at large information needs, but on top of that, what are women's unique information and development needs, goals, aspirations vis-a-vis agriculture or health or any of the development sectors. And yes, when you go to focus groups, take a look who's around when you're interviewing people, etc. Women, as Katie brought up, they're not a monolith. Once you talk to one, she is not a representative for the rest of the community. Often it's the most empowered women women in the community. And I've seen this, for 20 plus years, every time I hold, community meetings, all this stuff, you think, wow, there's all these women around. No, they're the ones that can be there. They're already the empowered ones. They're someone's wife. They are a lay pastor in a church. They have an elevated role, and they honestly do not speak for other women. And honestly, there's such a psychological gap between empowered women and unempowered women in even the poorest communities that we're leaving out a ton of women who are actually doing the work and who don't have a voice and who can't. So when I do like a technology training, or even a design and HCI camp where we get out a bunch of clay and rocks and we build what the device needs to look like so that it can fit within their waistband of their dress, and it can, like, all of these factors that we don't usually play with. But I still look around at the women and I say, well, who are the women that aren't here? Oh, they're the poor ones. They have to work in the field. They have to do something like that can't be here. These are the really hard women to reach. This is not last mile. This is like last meter. And if you are going to do this thing, this design with the end user, which is the first digital principle, for a reason, it's hard and it's laborious and it's expensive, and men can't usually access these women. You're going to need a woman. You're going to need some translators, not just one. You're going to need a cultural expert, which is why we need to tap into more sociological and anthropological and development expertise in region. Then we have a fighting chance.
Fantastic. I think that those are incredibly important points that I'm sure our viewers will appreciate. Matt, I would love to kick that over to you, because I know during your presentation you mentioned that user design is a huge part of the AgriTech project. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you engage with some of the designers and the developers who are benefiting from that project.
So, yeah, we make sure that there's a few things here. So we go through a process of initially when we're working with the stakeholders to build the initial sort of instance of the service or the product, to make sure we have a diverse portfolio of people or farmers that we're interviewing, and making sure that our interview team is also diverse. Because, there are certain conversations that can and can't be had depending on who's in the field. But also during during the project, we will disaggregate data as best we can when we see when we get the usage data. That has its own difficulties as well, obviously, but by segmenting these different groups, and I'm mindful that of what Katie said about putting people into different buckets, we do an element of that, but by creating these buckets and seeing how a different bucket is using the service, we can compare and contrast and see if there is actually a gender difference or we're missing something. And what I wanted to say was it's something that we're still pushing, is making sure that when data collection is happening, that it is disaggregated. But on a slightly separate point, the point I wanted to make here was when we're talking to the operators and they're making their rollout plans, I want to pick up on a point Katie said about dormant versus active accounts, and lots of incentives when you're recruiting or onboarding new users onto services. Everyone is often targeted, or their commission is targeted about registering that new user, but commissions are not targeted at making sure you register, but also making that customer active. So people will do okay, here's your new SIM card, or here, I've signed you up to the new service, off you go, thanks very much. But actually taking that extra step to say, right, this is how you use the thing, and this is why the service is relevant to you, and maybe helping them with that first transaction so that they become a long-term user of the service. That's where a critical difference is to how services have been deployed in the past.
Interesting. So it sounds like there's an opportunity there to focus on how to take that engagement one step further, so that we can make sure that women are actually using the products, understanding how to use them, which is critical. Olivia, one question that I have for you, you've talked through the G7 partnership and the 3 different pillars that your team is focusing on specifically. I know that UNCDF works across sectors, but as this is ICT for Ag, I was just wondering if there are any experiences or lessons from the work that you've done either in advocacy or capacity building that you think are particularly important for people working in the agriculture sector to be aware of.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question, actually. What I would like to focus on is maybe the need to collect 6 disaggregated data, so to understand what are the specific financial needs of women. And when we talk about sex disaggregated data, we cannot just focus on women as a whole. We need to understand the differences between different categories of women. And smallholder farmers, for instance, is one in particular. So it's really important to, during the stakeholder consultation that we engage in, to also discuss with these smallholder farmer groups, with women association, to have the specific data on challenges faced by women in the agricultural sector. So it's really important also to work with different teams. So not only the one focuses on policies and regulations, so enabling governments and policymakers and central bankers to understand what are the financial needs of women in the agricultural sector, but also to work with our teams focusing on the market development approach to enable them to work with financial service providers to understand how to develop those gender relevant financial products and services, so that we have mentioned already that girls and women lack the financial capabilities, the confidence, and the communication channels to voice their financial concerns. So it takes different types of stakeholders to ensure that we first understand the specific financial concerns, and we can work together to tackle them and have more gender relevant policies and regulations.
Wonderful, thank you. And it sounds, kind of harkening back to what Matt's comments were and Revi's comments were, that the disaggregating data is incredibly important. Sadly, our time together has come to an end, but thank you, Revi, Katie, Matt, and Olivia for your presentations and for the fantastic experiences and learnings that you shared with us today. I learned so much and look forward to checking out some of the incredible work that you've discussed. On behalf of this panel, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. We hope to engage you in the chat during this session and throughout the conference. Thanks to our hosts, USAID, Feed the Future, and to our partners and conference managers, AMZ. We hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.
Whew. What a great first third of the conference. We are so excited that you all have been here engaging with us on the chats, the discussion boards, messaging one another, and doing just about everything you can to make this feel like we're all together in one space. Next, we have a little fun surprise for you all. Head over to our next session, which will be a social hour, and make sure that while you're doing that, you also take some time to send a message to 3 new people, and also post on at least 1 discussion board. We'll see you all soon.